I thought I was finally chosen, finally safe. But on our wedding night, my husband turned away. Not just from our bed, from me. He said, "It's not consent if I'm pressured." Then he locked me out of our bank accounts, filed documents in my name, and with my sister and his mother, he built a business behind my back. I wasn't just betrayed, I was erased. They thought I'd never fight back. But they didn't know what silence can build. What would you do if your whole marriage turned out to be a setup? It had only been a few hours since the wedding. The condo was clean, quiet, still holding the scent of flowers from the bouquet Merrick had carried in. Outside, snow was starting to gather along the edge of the balcony. Everything looked picture perfect, at least from the outside. The kind of evening where you'd expect two people to be clinking champagne glasses, dancing barefoot in the kitchen, laughing about the music selection or the guests who stayed too long. But inside that condo, it was like someone had turned the emotional thermostat all the way down. I walked into the bedroom carrying a bottle of wine. It was the same one we drank on our first anniversary of dating. He liked symbolism. At least, he used to. The lights were dim, the bed was made, the room was warm enough. But Merrick was standing by the window, scrolling through his phone like he was waiting for the clock to hit midnight and turn us back into strangers. "I'm gonna crash early," he said, without looking up. "Kinda overloaded from the day." I gave him a soft nod. "Sure, yeah, I get it." He grabbed a blanket and walked down the hall toward the guest room. No kiss, no hug, no glance. I stood there, holding that wine, thinking maybe this was what happens when people are just tired. "He's probably overwhelmed," I whispered to myself, trying to steady the weird pit forming in my stomach. "Aren't we all?" The next morning, I woke up alone. That wasn't surprising. But what hit me harder was the perfectly made bed in the guest room. He hadn't used it, which meant he didn't just need space, he didn't even sleep. Or he slept somewhere else. A sticky note on the fridge read, "Had to run out early. Be back around lunch." There was no "love you," no "thanks for last night," no little heart drawn at the corner. Just logistics. When he got back, I asked if he was okay. He nodded too fast. "Just adjusting," he said. You know how big life shifts can throw your rhythm off. I tried to touch his shoulder as he walked by me in the kitchen, but he flinched, just slightly, and reached into the cabinet like it hadn't happened. Later that night, I leaned in to kiss him on the cheek. He turned away. "Not now." That became the phrase of the week. Not now. When I tried to hold his hand, not now. When I asked to talk, not now. Always said with that same cool tone, the one that made me feel like a chore instead of a partner. I chalked it up to anxiety, maybe some family stuff he hadn't unpacked yet, but by the 5th day, I felt like a house guest, not a newlywed. I tried one last time to reach for what we used to have. 6th night, I set up dinner, lit candles, played his favorite Miles Davis record. I even wore the cologne he once said made me smell like home. We sat across from each other in silence, the kind that buzzes in your ears because it's so loud inside your head. When I moved to hold his hand, he pulled back, sharply this time. "Merrick, we're married," I said, my voice low. "We've been together 2 years. You haven't touched me in 6 days." He exhaled, that long, tired sigh people use when they're about to say something they've been holding in. "It's not consent if I'm pressured." The words knocked the wind out of me. Before I could reply, he added, "Just because we're married doesn't mean you own my body." I froze. My hands dropped to my lap. I looked down at the plate, untouched, food getting cold. He said it like I was some kind of predator, like I was someone he had to protect himself from. In that moment, everything shifted. I felt shame crawl up my neck. Not because I did something wrong, but because I started to believe I might have. Was this why he married me? To create the illusion, then control the narrative? I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't trust myself to speak without crying. And I wasn't going to give him tears, not that night. The days that followed felt like walking through wet cement. Nothing moved. I went to work, answered emails, made calls, but inside, I was crumbling. Every time I looked at him, All I saw was someone who didn't want to be there, and maybe never had. I stopped telling my sister about how things were going. Didn't respond to friends who messaged asking how married life was treating me. What could I say? We haven't so much as hugged since the wedding, but hey, the guest towels look great. I started sleeping in the office, not because I was kicked out, but because I couldn't stand to share air with someone who looked at me like I was inconvenient. One night, I came across the napkin from our wedding, the one Merrick asked the catering staff to fold into a leaf. For your love of landscaping, he'd told me, back when he used to mean things. That napkin was still folded the same way, sitting untouched in the center of our dining table. Neatly creased, symbolic, decorative, just like everything else he gave me. Still folded, still perfect, still untouched. The morning after that dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't want. Merrick had already left, claiming he had early calls to make, back-to-back client sessions. I watched the steam rise from my mug like it had something to say, but wouldn't. The gas bill had come in. I figured I'd be useful, contribute to the house. Logged into the shared account Merrick set up before the wedding. At least that's what I assumed it was, but my access was denied. Wrong password, maybe. I reset it, still locked. When I asked Merrick that evening, he didn't even blink. Oh, yeah, I moved everything to a different account. Less messy that way. I'll handle it all. One less thing for you to worry about. He said it with a smile, like it was a favor, a gesture of protection. I'm just trying to look out for you, he added, patting my shoulder like I was a tired child who needed simplifying. I wanted to say, but it's my money too. I didn't. Instead, I nodded. Then went upstairs and sat alone in the bedroom for an hour, telling myself that maybe this is just how things are. One person handles the logistics, the other supports. It's not like he doesn't trust me. He married me, but that thought didn't land as softly as I hoped it would. The days got colder after that, not just outside, but inside the house too. We barely ate together. He stopped asking if I wanted to watch our show. I stopped asking if he was okay. It felt like we were living in a model home, clean, quiet, perfectly arranged, and completely uninhabited. Merrick was always in his office now, or on his phone. He'd whisper sometimes when I walked by, then pause like he was waiting for me to leave before continuing. I started to feel invasive in my own home, like my footsteps were interruptions. I reached out to touch his hand one evening while we were both on the couch. He didn't pull away violently, just enough to make me feel foolish. A little flinch, a little fake smile, then back to scrolling. You're intense, he told me later when I asked if everything was all right. I waited for the part where he said it was a good thing. He didn't. It's not bad, he added. Just a lot sometimes. I nodded, then went to bed early. If I could have turned down the volume on my personality, I think I would have tried. It was at dinner, 3 nights later, that he brought up his ex, the one he never talked about until now. She was the most independent person I ever knew. Never clingy, never dramatic. I paused mid-chew. He didn't look at me when he said it, just kept slicing his chicken like he was reading off a menu. Sometimes, he added, I miss that energy. Just existing next to someone, not inside them. I didn't respond. Because what do you say to that? Thanks for comparing me to someone you apparently still wish you had. All I could think was, I'm not a guest in this house. I live here. But you make me feel like a bag left on the porch. He doesn't want a partner. He wants an accessory that doesn't interrupt. Later that night, I saw he had posted one of our wedding photos on Facebook, captioned it, "Married my best friend, grateful beyond words." The comments rolled in, "Beautiful couple. So happy for you two. Power duo." A friend texted me directly, "You look radiant." I sent back a smiley face. Then I deleted the app. It hit me right then. This wasn't a marriage. It was a campaign. Merrick wasn't living with me. He was living with a version of me that looked great on camera. I wrote in my journal that night, I don't know if this is love or marketing, but either way, I'm the one holding the sign and he's the one cashing the checks. I started saving things. Screenshots, emails, voicemail backups, bank statements. I didn't know why. Just a whisper in the back of my mind saying, don't delete. Don't trust too soon. One night, while lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I pulled out my phone and typed into Google, "Can a spouse legally keep you out of shared finances?" The page loaded. I started reading. This isn't love. This is leverage. I'd gotten good at pretending I didn't notice the silence. But it wasn't just the silence anymore. It was what came with it. The calculated quiet. The strategic absence. Merrick left earlier every day. Came home later. No texts, no check-ins. I used to hear his keys jingling by the door. Now I just noticed his coat wasn't hanging on the rack. At first, I'd ask how his day went. He'd answer with half a shrug. I'd mention something funny I saw online. He'd say, "Huh," without looking up from his phone. Eventually, I stopped trying. I started talking to myself out loud just to fill the space. And it hit me one evening while folding towels. I sounded like someone rehearsing life alone, like I was a memory left behind in a house I still lived in. It was a strange thing, realizing you could feel like a ghost without ever dying. On Thursday afternoon, Vivica called, said she was just checking in. She opened with pleasantries. Then came the turn. "I know Merrick's been under a lot of pressure lately," she said, voice syrupy, measured. "You have such a strong personality, sweetheart. Have you thought about talking to someone?" "Talking to someone," I repeated. "A therapist, maybe," she offered. "You know, just to settle your energy. You're very intense. Merrick needs peace." It wasn't the suggestion that stung. It was the tone, the way she made it sound like a favor, like I was the cracked tile ruining the kitchen remodel. "Thank you," I said. "I'll take that into consideration." I didn't say another word, and for the first time, I didn't rush to defend Merrick. Not to her, not even to myself. That night, I started cleaning the living room, vacuumed, dusted. I was down on my knees pulling out cords behind the console when I found the iPad. We hadn't used it since the wedding playlist was loaded into it. It still had the same case. I didn't think twice about waking it up. It was plugged in, battery full. The screen lit up. Notifications started rolling in. Then I saw it, a message, from someone saved as L. "Miss your bed. Does he still sleep in the guest room?" I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I read it again, and again. Then I took a screenshot. I didn't know who L was, but she knew me, or knew enough to ask about the guest room. That was worse somehow. I didn't reply. Just sat there, screen glowing, thumb hovering. I saved the screenshot, then locked the screen, set the iPad face down, and just sat there, in a room that used to play love songs. For a few hours, I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, a joke, someone reaching the wrong person, maybe even a friend teasing him. But that voice inside me, the one that used to whisper, now started screaming. The next morning, I opened the recently deleted folder and restored the screenshot. Just in case, I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I smiled when he came home, asked about his day. Washed the dishes while he talked vaguely about a client who was being difficult. He never asked about mine. I started acting normal, which is a strange kind of lie, pretending nothing's wrong when everything feels rigged. But the truth is, when you have to act normal, something's already abnormal. I started looking through the trash under the bathroom sink. Opened drawers, checked browser histories, nothing obvious, but everything felt too clean, too curated. He wasn't messy, he was meticulous. That scared me more. So I started logging things, receipt dates, meal times, when he left, when he returned. I wasn't sure what I was building, but I knew it mattered. Each night, I sat in our bedroom that no longer felt like ours. Sometimes I wrote, sometimes I just stared at the iPad, still glowing on the table in front of me. The message stayed right there, unread, untouched. "Miss your bed." The taxes were supposed to be easy. I was just sorting receipts at the kitchen table while Merrick was out again. He'd said he'd be home by dinner. That was 2 hours ago. There was a folder we used for shared purchases, tucked beside our junk drawer. Most of it was grocery runs, hardware store slips, the usual. But halfway through the stack, I found one from a flower shop in Las Vegas. Roses. A dozen. Long-stemmed, premium. The receipt had Merrick's signature, but what stopped me was the note scribbled on the back. Same room as last time. I stared at it for a while, not shocked, not heartbroken, just still. We were in Salt Lake City that weekend. At least, that's where he said he was. I pulled out my phone, took a picture, then another, then opened a new email, one with a name that had nothing to do with mine. Sent the file to it, labeled it Exhibit 1, Vegas Roses. 1 lie is a crack. 2, a pattern. The next morning, I sat on the edge of our bed, laptop open. His Google account was still linked to our old honeymoon planning doc. From there, I followed a trail most people forget exists. Location history. Vegas. Not once. Twice. The same hotel both times. Dates matched the receipt and the weekend I went to see my sister. Later that day, I drove to a cafe Merrick mentioned often. Said it's where he met a few of his local clients. I ordered tea. Waited. Watched. Then asked the barista casually, "You know a guy named Merrick? Works in finance. Comes here every Thursday?" Blank stare. Never heard of him. I finished my drink. Drove home. Parked. Sat in the car with the heat running, staring at my hands. This isn't a marriage. It's a con. Calm is how hunters work. And I was done being prey. That night, I checked the security app. Something had been nudging me for days. I'd gone to visit my cousin the weekend before. Merrick stayed back. Said he had to catch up on filings. I scrolled through the footage. Saturday, 2:13 p.m. Door opens. A tall woman walks in. Auburn hair, sharp coat, confident step. Merrick greets her like someone he'd missed. Not with words, with his hands. He hugs her like he remembers how she smells. She stays 3 hours, leaves with her hair slightly undone. The tote she carries has a monogram, L. "Missed your bed," the iPad message had said. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I downloaded the footage. Titled the file, Exhibit 2, Entry with Guest. I opened a new folder. Password protected. Cloud-backed. Everything went in. Screenshots, receipts, calendar inconsistencies, camera footage. Then I bought a prepaid phone, in cash, registered it under a different name, saved numbers I didn't want in my call history, and the folder, I labeled it, If I Disappear. Not because I thought I'd vanish, but because I knew what this was now. This was no longer a fight for affection. This was legal warfare. I looked up law firms in Denver. Scrolled until I found one that handled marriage fraud, financial abuse, identity theft. Booked a consult, burner phone only. He wasn't going to see it coming, not because I was hiding, but because he thought I'd already disappeared. That night, he came home smiling. "Clients are finally settling their accounts," he said, tossing his coat over the back of a chair. "Glad to hear," I replied, stirring the pot on the stove. He kissed the top of my head like everything was fine. After dinner, he showered. While he was in there, I slipped into his office. There was a locked drawer I wasn't allowed to touch. I didn't try to open it. I just left a sticky note right on the handle. "Thank you for your transparency." Then I turned off the light, walked out, and locked the office door behind me. He doesn't need to know I know. Not yet. For 3 days, I moved through the house like I was folding into it. I cooked the meals, I ran the errands, I cleaned the corners no one noticed. But everything I did felt like mimicry, not living. I stopped answering messages, deleted every birthday reminder, let the voicemails stack up. Merrick didn't ask why. He just said, "I know this adjustment is hard for you," and kissed the top of my head like I was a child holding a tantrum inside. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the receipt, the message, the hug on camera. They were all unrelated threads. A bad joke the universe was telling. Or worse, maybe I had wanted it to be true so badly, I was building betrayal out of shadows. But then the email arrived. No subject line, just a thread forwarded to my inbox, accidentally, maybe sent too quickly, or maybe his arrogance slipped. From Merrick to someone unnamed. Final phase of the exit strategy. She'll likely file first. If we keep the tone cool, she'll pull the trigger herself. With the prenup as written, she walks away with nothing if it's her move. One clean cut. I sat there staring at it, not breathing. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels exact. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I forwarded it to my backup email. Printed it twice, one for the folder, one for the fireproof box. So this was never about marriage, I whispered to myself. It was about maneuvering. I thought that would be the bottom, but it wasn't. 2 days later, I dug deeper. I scrubbed through more footage, pausing, rewinding, looking for clarity, not just closure. That's when I saw her again. A better angle this time. Hair pulled back, jacket open, smiling as she walked through our front door. I uploaded the image into a reverse photo tool. Didn't expect anything to come back, but it did. Lysandra Boone, a name I hadn't heard in years. A woman I'd met at the clinic where I volunteered my weekends, back when I thought people helped each other just to help. She worked admin. Bright laugh, warm hands, said I was gentle energy, said Merrick was lucky. I guess he was. She didn't just take what was mine. She knew who she was taking it from, and that made it worse. That night, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt ready. I cleared the dining table, laid everything out. Receipts, email printouts, stills from the security cam. Gave each one a label, built the timeline. I called a friend, an old college contact, asked if she knew anyone who worked in legal fraud. "Don't worry," I said before she could ask questions. "It's not urgent. Yet." I booked a consult downtown under a name that wasn't mine. Used the burner phone. Took only copies, never the originals. At home, I didn't yell. Didn't accuse. I kept the routine, chopped vegetables, paid the bills. Slept 6 feet away from someone who thought he had me fenced in. I gave him nothing, and in giving nothing, I took everything he wasn't watching. I didn't leave, but I wasn't afraid of leaving anymore. Later that week, I stopped by the healing garden I helped design years ago. The plants had grown and crooked. Some were overwatered, others left dry. There was a boy, 15 maybe, planting herbs in the wrong place. His supervisor corrected him a little too loudly. The boy looked small, like he wanted to shrink out of his own skin. As I passed, I paused. "Don't ever confuse someone's silence for their surrender," I told him. He blinked at me, unsure whether it was advice or a warning. I walked away without waiting for an answer. Back at home, I unloaded groceries, sat on the porch, watched nothing in particular. There was a kind of stillness that wasn't empty anymore. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I just wanted my name back. The next morning, I made Merrick his usual coffee, light cream, no sugar. I placed it on the counter, and when he turned to take it, I looked him in the eye, for the first time in weeks, not as his spouse, but as his opponent. The email had been sent, the files were saved, the burner phone stayed off, tucked into the back of my sock drawer beneath receipts and an old passport. I wasn't paranoid, not anymore. I was prepared. That Tuesday morning, while Merrick was at work, or at least claiming to be, I got a notification from the credit monitoring service I'd signed up for last week. New account activity, a business registration. Nevada. Under my name. I don't remember blinking. I clicked through. Company name I didn't recognize, but the signature, mine. The address, our condo, and the co-owner, Merrick Alden. I downloaded every PDF, screenshot, and registration file I could find, sent them to my secure account, then printed hard copies and filed them under a folder labeled, "Not if, when." He didn't just want my trust. He wanted my signature without my consent. I stared at my name on those documents, like it belonged to someone else. Later that afternoon, I sat in front of an attorney in Denver, using the alias I'd used to book the appointment. Said I was a small business owner who'd had my identity hijacked by a partner. She listened. Didn't interrupt. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "Was this person related to you by law?" I nodded once. "Then we're in a different category. If you can prove intent before or during the marriage, we may be able to challenge the prenup itself." I asked her what she meant by intent. She said, "Planning. Pattern. Proof he was building the marriage as a front." I left her office with that word ringing in my ears. Pattern. The next day, I pulled out the storage bins in our hallway closet, digging through leftover wedding items. I wanted to find something, anything that could help me fill the gaps. One of the boxes was labeled keepsakes. Inside was a stack of cards tied with a silk ribbon, and one envelope, heavier than the others. To our son. It was handwritten, sealed, unopened. I sat down on the floor and broke the seal. Inside, a letter from Merrick's parents, praising his strength, his ambition, his discernment. "You've always made smart choices," his mother had written. "We couldn't be prouder of the man you've become." Not once did they mention me. No you two, no both of you, no welcome into the family, not even my name. It wasn't the absence that cut. It was the certainty that I'd been deliberately removed. Even in writing, I was just a footnote to his performance. That evening, I made Merrick his usual tea. Chamomile, no lemon. He came home humming. Something upbeat. Maybe he thought the storm had passed. We sat in the living room, news playing low in the background. I handed him the mug and sat across from him. I said, "If you think I won't protect myself, you're wrong. And if you think I'll break before I speak, you're even more wrong." He blinked, set the mug down, smiled like I'd told a joke. "What's this about?" I didn't answer. I stood up, picked up my phone, walked into the kitchen. He called after me, "Babe?" I didn't turn around. I didn't need him scared. I needed him reckless. The rest of the week, I barely spoke. When I did, it was short, clipped. I cooked dinner, did laundry, sat beside him on the couch, and every night I stayed up after he slept, organizing my evidence by time and date, screenshots, voicemails, travel logs, contracts. I drew a timeline on a whiteboard I kept hidden behind my desk. What I knew, when I learned it, what he didn't know I knew. I called my cousin in Santa Fe, told her I might need a place for a few weeks. She didn't ask why. Thursday evening, I walked past the mantel where our wedding photo sat. Merrick had added a sticky note months ago. "Forever." I peeled it off, held it for a moment, then threw it in the trash. I stopped reacting. That was the shift. Merrick didn't notice it at first. He thought my silence meant surrender. It didn't. It meant I was listening now, closer than ever. I started keeping my distance just enough to make it believable. Less eye contact, fewer questions, the occasional nod at dinner. He seemed relieved, smiled more, hummed in the kitchen. Maybe he thought he was winning. He started slipping, leaving half-written emails open on his laptop, taking speakerphone calls in the hallway. One afternoon, I heard him say, "She's calmer now. I think it's working." I didn't ask who he was talking to. I didn't even write it down. I didn't need to. People say silence is awkward. No, silence is revealing. That weekend, I pulled out an old external hard drive where I'd backed up our wedding footage. I hadn't touched it since the honeymoon. Thought maybe I'd need something nostalgic to ground me. I opened the edited version first. It ran smooth. Merrick's parents gave their toasts. Our friends laughed, cried. He spoke about building a future together with honesty, but something was off. My speech was missing. I remember writing it by hand, shaking as I read it that day, talking about what it meant to be truly chosen by someone, about building safety, not strategy. I remember the way people clapped when I finished, how Merrick kissed my hand. But on the final video, it was gone. Not shortened, gone. I dug through older folders and found the raw footage. There I was, center stage, full speech, still nervous, still real. And there, sitting just behind Merrick, was his mother, Vivica, half smiling, shaking her head. No one else noticed it, but I saw it. It wasn't oversight. It was erasure. I exported both versions, saved them under a new label, before, after. The next morning, I got a call from Janice, an old paralegal friend I'd quietly asked to run a business registry search. She sounded winded. "Dorian, you're not going to believe this. Merrick's mom, Vivica, she's listed as co-owner on the Nevada LLC, managing partner, P.O. Box registered a month before your wedding." I thanked her, hung up, felt nothing, not rage, not heartbreak, just precision. I started printing everything, annotating timelines, recording my own voice, reading out the dates, the names, the connections. That night, I cleared a wall in my office and started taping documents in lines, like a detective in a movie, except no one was coming to rescue me. No one had to. I remembered something my mother said a year ago, sitting on the porch with a glass of wine. The people who rush in the fastest often have the most to hide. Back then, I thought she was talking about my last breakup. Now I knew. She had seen this coming. I wrote it on a sticky note and slapped it next to the word motive. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about justice. I needed a quiet space to think, to breathe. I drove into the Rockies, parked off the shoulder, pulled out a small recorder. I talked for an hour straight. Not about Merrick. About me. What I'd lost. What I'd seen. What I'd learned. It wasn't for the courts. It was for clarity. Later that night, I returned home, backed up everything to 4 separate accounts, encrypted and named each one after old street names I used to live on. Then I sat at the dining table, lit a single candle, no music, no noise, just me, and whispered, "I'm ready for the fallout now." The candle flickered, and then I heard it. Merrick's voice from the office, just loud enough to carry down the hall. "She's close to signing, just a little more time." By the 6th week, Merrick thought he had me figured out. He complimented me more, casually dropped lines like, "You're handling things so well lately," or, "Maybe we finally found our rhythm." He kissed my cheek in the morning, stood a little closer when he walked past. He mistook my stillness for surrender. But I wasn't still. I was steady. The case was already built. My cousin in Santa Fe was on standby. My files were triple backed up. Merrick was dancing at the edge of a trap he didn't even know he'd stepped into. The more secure he felt, the more visible his guilt became. Thursday morning, I woke up to a text from my bank. It didn't start with, "Good morning." It started with, "We've detected unusual activity on your account. Please visit the nearest branch." By 9 a.m., I was sitting in front of a woman named Joanne, who wore glasses too large for her face, but spoke with a kindness I hadn't felt in weeks. "I'm sorry, but your account was frozen due to suspicious identity activity," she said, clicking through her monitor. "A new account was created using your name, with a slightly different email and phone number. A power of attorney was submitted, allowing full access and control to another party." I didn't flinch. "Can you show me the power of attorney form?" She nodded, printed it, and slid it across the desk. Merrick's signature. And mine. Except it wasn't mine. I leaned forward. "Could you have this notarized for me?" She looked confused for half a second, then clicked. "Of course." That piece of paper, officially sealed, was the last lock on the door I was about to kick open. That afternoon, I called Tressa. She didn't answer. Again. For the 5th time. We hadn't spoken much lately, but I still held on to the hope that if everything fell apart, she'd be there. Later, while driving past the notary's office Merrick used before, I spotted her car. I parked, waited. 10 minutes later, she came out with a man I didn't recognize. He shook her hand. She smiled, got in the car and left. I pulled up her Instagram out of habit. A new story was up. Snapshot of a coffee mug. A caption. "Teamwork makes the dream work." She had tagged Merrick's legal assistant. She wasn't silent because she was neutral. She was silent because she'd already chosen a side. I screenshotted it, filed it. Back home, I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the wedding photo frame. We'd displayed it at the front table. Guests signed the border. Merrick had picked the photo. I opened the frame to scan it. Behind it was the original. In the printed version, I was cropped out. It was Merrick. Alone. Beaming. I held both photos in my hands. Didn't cry. Didn't curse. Just stared. Then labeled the scan. Perception versus reality. That night, I sent my attorney the final package. Affidavits, footage stills, the bank documents, the altered wedding photo. I titled the file, "Closure Packet." I signed the affidavit, not as a spouse seeking divorce, but as a victim filing for fraud. 3 copies were made, one to the attorney, one to a backup firm, one to a safe I'd had installed in my cousin's basement. When Merrick came home, he was unusually upbeat. Said he'd booked us a couples therapy session, just to make sure we're on the same page. "Maybe we should take a break for mental clarity," he said, pouring himself a drink. I smiled. "Already ahead of you." I handed him the envelope. He opened it, and for the first time in 6 weeks, it was his hands that trembled. I wore my father's suit to court. The seams didn't fit quite right across the shoulders, but the weight of it grounded me. No tie, just the suit, a clean white shirt, and a face that had spent 6 weeks learning how not to blink. Merrick was already seated when I walked in. His skin looked thinner than it used to. The usual charm had drained from his posture. He tried to meet my eye. I didn't offer him that dignity. The judge reviewed the affidavit, then the documents, the photos, the audio, the video of Lysandra entering the condo, the forged power of attorney, the cropped wedding photo. It was all there. Merrick leaned forward. He called it a misunderstanding. He said we'd had emotional confusion, that this was a communication breakdown between two high-functioning individuals under pressure. The judge didn't blink. I didn't have to speak much. Truth doesn't need backup singers. She ruled in favor of annulment based on fraudulent intent. The prenup? Voided. And the bank accounts? Investigated. The reputation Merrick spent years cultivating shattered in a morning. When court was dismissed, I stood. Merrick didn't look at me. Vivica never showed. Outside, I expected something. Anger, guilt, maybe a half-hearted apology from someone who realized they went too far. But there was nothing. Tressa texted me an hour later. I didn't know it would go this far. I never replied. Their silence used to hurt. Now, it just means I'm out of range. I returned to the condo that afternoon. One last time. The place was cold. Not physically, it just felt done. I packed the final box from the bedroom, then opened the closet to grab the wedding frame Merrick insisted we keep displayed, the one he said grounds the space. I took out the cropped version, the one where I was missing, and tucked it behind the original. I placed both back in the frame. Full photo in front this time. I wrote a small note. One was for the world. The other was real. I left it on the kitchen counter. I didn't slam the door when I left, just pulled it shut and walked toward the waiting cab. Santa Fe was quieter than I remembered. My cousin met me with a hug and didn't ask questions. She just handed me the key and said, "The back garden needs a little love." The air there didn't smell like strategy. It smelled like open windows and fresh dirt. I helped her replant the beds, kneeling in soil, fingernails dirty. No performance, just breath, just motion. I slept without checking my phone. I woke up without waiting for footsteps down the hall. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. When the noise stops hurting, you know you're safe. A week later, I started writing again. Not emails, not timelines, just a letter. To no one. Or maybe to me. I didn't name Merrick. Didn't have to. I wrote about what it means to be erased in your own story, and what it takes to rewrite it. In the final paragraph I wrote, "Healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just not apologizing for the space you take up anymore." I folded the page, slid it into the back of a book on my nightstand. And just as I placed the book down, the doorbell rang. Not a threat, not a warning, just a knock reminding me life was beginning again.